Honestly, the wagon should have been empty. That was the first thing Elijah Crow noticed as the sun dipped low. Behind the ochre hills, bleeding amber light across the plains. No markings. No merchant insignia. No trail dust fresh enough to suggest recent travel. Just a heavy old freight wagon sitting crooked near the dry creek bed. Its wheels half sunk into cracked earth like it had been abandoned by time itself. Elijah had ridden these frontier routes for 20 years. As a rancher, a former scout, a man who learned early that survival depended on noticing what didn't belong, and this wagon didn't belong. His horse snorted uneasily as Elijah dismounted, hand resting near his revolver more from habit than fear. The land was quiet in that unsettling way the frontier got just before nightfall, when even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. He called out once, then again, no answer. As he stepped closer, he noticed the ropes, thick, knotted ropes looped tightly around the wagon's rear slats, drawn not to secure cargo but to seal it shut. That was when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost mistook it for the wind slipping through dry grass, a whimper. Elijah froze. He leaned closer, heart pounding now, and pressed his ear against the wood. What came next turned his blood cold. The muffled breathing of many, uneven and scared, layered together in the dark. He tore at the ropes with sudden urgency, fingers scraping raw as knots gave way one by one. When the back panel finally fell open, the smell hit him first. Sweat, dust, fear, and something worse, despair that had been sitting too long in a confined space. Inside, huddled together like frightened animals, were children. Not one or two, 20 of them. Boys and girls ranging from barely 5 to maybe 12 years old. Faces streaked with dirt, eyes wide and hollow. Some clutched each other. Others stared at him as if he were another nightmare come to finish the job. One girl tried to stand and collapsed. Another whispered something Elijah couldn't hear. His knees nearly gave out. He had seen cruelty on the frontier. Raids, broken families, bodies left for the sun, but this was different. This was organized, deliberate. Someone had locked 20 children into a wagon and left them in the heat to either be collected later or forgotten. Elijah spoke softly, forcing calm into his voice as he handed out his water, tearing strips from his shirt to wipe faces, checking pulses like he remembered from his army days. One boy flinched at his touch. Another asked in a voice so dry it barely carried, "Are you real?" Elijah swallowed hard. "I am," he said, "and you're safe now." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Not yet. Because no one did this by accident. As night fell, Elijah made a decision that would change his life forever. He loaded the weakest children onto his horses, pack, and guided the wagon slowly toward his ranch, never letting his hand stray far from his gun. Behind him, the land remained silent, but somewhere out there, the people responsible would realize their cargo was missing, and when they did, the frontier's darkest secret would begin clawing its way into the light. By the time dawn bled pale gold across the horizon, Elijah Crow had not slept. He sat on the edge of his porch, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the yard where the wagon stood under a lean-to, its boards now loosened, its secret exposed. Inside his house, every room was filled with the quiet sounds of survival. Soft coughing, whispered prayers, the scrape of bare feet on wood. 20 children, 20 lives pulled back from the brink by a single moment of attention on a forgotten road. Elijah had spent the night moving between them, rationing water, warming broth, binding wounds he didn't ask. Questions about because the answers were written plainly enough on small wrists, rubbed raw by rope, on backs striped by neglect, on eyes that flinched at the creak of a hinge. As the sun climbed, the truth began to surface in fragments, as truths like these always did, broken, reluctant, carried on the breath of children who had learned too early that speaking could be dangerous. They had come from different places, river towns, mining camps, farming settlements that barely existed on any map. Some had been taken after their parents died of fever or accident. Others were promised work, schooling, a hot meal, a man with a ledger and a smile, a woman with a kind voice who said she'd keep them safe. Names repeated across different mouths, and with them a symbol, an iron brand burned faintly, into a crate that one boy remembered seeing in a warehouse by the rail spur 2 days' ride east. Elijah's jaw tightened as he listened. This wasn't banditry. It wasn't random cruelty. It was a system. By noon, dust rose on the road. Elijah didn't move for his rifle until he recognized the rider, Deputy Harland, coat unbuttoned, hat tipped back, easy smile already forming as if nothing in the world could trouble him. Harland dismounted, eyes drifting to the wagon, then to the children peering from windows. "That's quite a mess you've got yourself into, Crow," he said lightly. Elijah stood. "It's not my mess," he replied, "but it's my responsibility now." Harland's smile thinned. He spoke of procedures, of transport, of taking the children into custody. He spoke too quickly. He avoided names. When Elijah asked where the children would be taken, Harland's eyes flicked away. That was answer enough. Elijah refused him. The air went tight. Harland warned him about interfering, about consequences, about how dangerous it was to stand alone on the frontier. Elijah watched the deputy ride away, the dust settling like a held breath. He knew what came next. That night men came, not masked, not hurried. They arrived with wagons and papers and the confidence of those who had done this before and expected compliance. Elijah had prepared. He had sent a rider at dawn to the nearest church mission with a note so blunt it burned. He had loaded his rifle and set lanterns high so there would be no shadows to hide in. When the men demanded the children, Elijah told them no. When they threatened him, he told them to leave. When they reached for their guns, shots cracked the night open. The fight was short and brutal and loud enough to carry for miles. By the time it ended, 2 men lay wounded, 1 ran, and the rest stood stunned by the sight of a rancher who would not be moved. The sound that followed, the church bell, ringing far off, was the most beautiful thing Elijah had ever heard. By morning, the mission wagons arrived, then the marshal from the rail town, then reporters hungry for a story they'd been told didn't exist. Papers were seized. Ledgers surfaced. Names, important names, appeared in neat columns, beside payments and routes and destinations no one wanted to acknowledge. The children were taken to safety, to care, to families who would take them in, not for profit but for mercy. The deputy resigned before he could be arrested. Others fled. Some faced trial. The frontier whispered for months, then years, about the rancher who opened a wagon and refused to close it again. Elijah returned to his quiet life. But the land around him felt different now, less forgiving of silence. Sometimes letters came, written in careful hands, learning confidence, thanking him for choosing to look. Elijah kept them in a box by his bed. On certain evenings, when the wind went still and the light turned gold, he would think of the wagon and the moment everything changed, and he would know that the darkest secrets do not fear guns or laws as much as they fear witnesses. And if you're still listening to this story, remember this: attention saves lives, courage multiplies, and truth once carried into the light has a way of finding its voice. If stories like this matter to you, stories of justice, courage, and hope, subscribe to the channel, stay with us, and help keep these voices heard.